Good evening, everyone, and welcome to yet another ShareSoc webinar. This one is, we have the great pleasure to welcome Lord Paul Drayson of Sensyne Health, which is a fascinating company involved in the health sector and applying AI to all manner of health-related technologies, really. Before we begin, we'll do what we normally do, have an attendee poll where you are invited to tell us if you are already an investor in Sensyne Health. And that just is a useful guide to us. So just quickly on your screen, let us know whether you're currently invested or not. And whilst we're waiting for those results, I will just run through our normal disclaimer. As you know, oh, well, there we go. From the breakdown, it's about a quarter of you are currently invested and 3/4 aren't. So there's lots of potential new investors to be harvested here. It's a company that I'm interested in finding out about, but let's just run through the normal opening slides. First of all, the disclaimer that you know, we're here just to facilitate really a meeting between a company and potential and existing investors. We're not giving any investment advice, so make your own mind up and do your own research after this presentation. ShareSoc, as you know, is a not-for-profit membership organisation, and we are always trying to increase our membership because that gives us more clout when we are campaigning for better corporate standards and for better representation of the interests of normal investors in companies listed on the London Stock Exchange. You've probably seen this slide before, but you know it all. We're here to help you, to inform you, to educate you, to create networking opportunities, to even save you money. And we facilitate the opportunity to meet companies such as Sensyne, and most importantly, to ask them questions, which is something that, especially in this era of COVID, where we're not having physical AGMs, it's not necessarily as easy as it should be. So it's great that companies take advantage of this, and it's great for investors that you get that opportunity. But do tell your friends and your family to sign up for ShareSoc so we can do more and more things. During the webinar, you'll notice there's a question and answer button down at the bottom of the screen. Do ask whatever questions you wish to of the company, but before doing so, check what questions people have already asked, and if necessary, give them an uptick, because we find it easiest if we end up asking the most popular questions, and often, you know, someone will have had the same idea as you, and so check what questions have been asked, and if someone's already asked what you would like to know, just give them an uptick, and we'll work through questions starting with the most popular ones. It makes my life easier, and make sure that we get most bang for our buck and we get those questions answered that most people are interested in. There's a Stockopedia report linked to Sensyne Health, which is included in this reminder email. Although, as I said this, I think last week when I was presenting the Abingdon Health one, Stockopedia is great for many things, but you always have to remember that a lot of its ratings are historic and based on what a company has done in the past. And when you get innovative companies in new areas, that historic look is often can obscure what's going on at the moment. So just bear that in mind. There'll be a copy of the presentation pack on the ShareSoc website, which is a good reason for being a full member. Don't forget to provide your feedback on this so we can work out what we're doing well and what we can improve on. And there's also a link on that on the chat section. So I won't attempt to discuss the many areas that Sensyne Health are involved in. They're best prepared to do that themselves. I will simply hand over to Paul Drayson, their founder and Chief Executive Officer, and let him talk through it.
Thanks very much, Paul. And thanks for inviting Sensyne onto your presentation this evening. It's great having an opportunity to meet with the ShareSoc members to tell you about Sensyne Health. I intend to talk for about 30 minutes to give us plenty of time for questions at the end. And as Paul has said, Sensyne Health is a company that uses clinical artificial intelligence to analyze anonymized patient data in partnership with the National Health Service to identify improvements that can be made to the way care is given within healthcare systems, such as our NHS, but also to help the pharmaceutical industry to improve the way in which they develop new medicines, and particularly to improve the productivity of pharmaceutical R&D. If we go on to slide 3, thanks very much. So Sensyne was a spin out originally from research at the University of Oxford in the UK, and really was founded to solve a particular conundrum, which is that we've seen how, as medicine has increasingly used computer systems to record the treatments of patients, we've moved from having patient records at the end of bed, charts recorded with pen and paper, to all of the treatments provided to patients through care being recorded in computer systems. The real complexity of modern medical practice is reflected in the data in those computer systems. The UK, because we have a single provider in the National Health Service, has a potentially significant competitive advantage in having a single data set looking after population of about 60 million people, which follows us from birth through to death, because we all have an NHS number. And this is a marvelous resource for research. As computer science has developed, the cost of storing data and the ability of us to develop new tools to really unravel the complexity of enormous data sets, the potential of using AI to make new discoveries from this patient data has become possible over the last few years. But there is a but, which is that this is highly personal private data. Using this data to be able to accelerate medical research is a good thing. Literally, data saves lives in that respect. But it needs to be done in a way which maintains the confidence of the public, which respects the privacy of the data, and which uses the highest standards of cybersecurity to protect that data. Sensyne was set up to achieve that. So we are today a company of about 130 employees listed on the AIM market of the London Stock Exchange. We work in partnership with NHS trusts in the United Kingdom, who provide us with anonymized patient data. We do not work with any personally identifiable information. In return for receiving equity in the company, and work with us in partnership to use AI tools, which Sensyne Health has developed over the last 4 to 5 years, to derive insights from the analysis of this data, which then has value, both in terms of improving care within the health system itself, but also in terms of accelerating the development of new medicines for the pharmaceutical industry. The tools that we develop, we sell as tools to help improve care and as tools to help the pharma industry develop new products. And that's how we generate our revenues. Over the last 2 to 3 years, we've developed a network of partnerships which have enabled us to scale this business model. Starting with their research partner, the University of Oxford. Oxford been obviously much in the news lately with the work that's been done on the Oxford vaccine, but the University of Oxford has been a world leader for a number of years, both in medical science and data science, and Sensyne has really benefited from that. We established a partnership with Microsoft, who provide us with tools that we use to be able to manage this data. We don't share any data with anyone else. This has enabled us to have the capacity to scale our business, and you'll hear a bit about that as I go through the presentation. The partnerships we've established in the United States with Cognizant and with Jefferson, 2 examples of how Sensyne has a global vision. This idea of working in partnership with healthcare providers, which was born here in the United Kingdom, has real global potential. So you'll hear how our ambition is to build a global technology company which uses this unique model of working in partnership with healthcare providers to drive revenue growth and to stay at the forefront of the use of ethical artificial intelligence to improve the care of patients, to accelerate the development of new medicines. If we go to the next slide, you'll see that really Sensyne is founded on two important assets. Firstly, the expertise that we have in the use of artificial intelligence tools to analyze highly complex data sets. That's based upon really a core science of fusing understanding of medicine with understanding of data science, being able to turn a clinical problem into a data science problem, which we can then solve using these tools. This is only possible through the access to the data. And we have now built a data set of over 10% of the UK population, representing about 6.8 million people, of anonymized patient data, which gives us the ability to be able to do this research. On this foundation, we have really three buckets of activity, two which are focused on solving problems for the NHS and healthcare providers in other markets around the world, and one which is focused on serving the global pharmaceutical industry. If I talk about the healthcare side, really there are two parts to what we do within healthcare. One is the provision of software applications which use clinical AI to enable patients to be looked after remotely. This has been a real advantage in dealing with the pressures of the recent pandemic. And alongside remote patient monitoring, the development of a platform which enables doctors and administrators within the NHS to be able to analyze the very large data sets in real time, to be able to answer specific questions that they have in terms of the better management of their hospital or coming to a decision about clinical outcomes for patients. So really two main buckets within healthcare. Both of those generate revenues to Sensyne through the provision of those tools to the healthcare system. On the life sciences side, here we are paid by the pharmaceutical industry to undertake research on their behalf, analyzing the data that we have access to answer specific questions that they have to improve the development of new medicines. For example, to identify how to better design late-stage clinical trials, to get new leads for the discovery of new compounds, and increasingly to find better ways to design clinical trials to reduce the cost and speed time to market. Both of these sides of the business are really two sides of the same coin. The way I sort of try to summarize what Sensyne is really as a docking station between the NHS and the pharmaceutical industry, providing a safe space for the analysis of this data to really accelerate improvements in patient care. So going to the next slide, just want to talk a little bit more about that relationship with the NHS. This is fundamental. Really, Sensyne is built on a completely new idea, a recognition that as data science and the use of artificial intelligence is being increasingly used, that the way in which it's used is key to maintaining the confidence of the public and in being able to realize the potential of this science in a way which is fair and effective. Fairness being about focusing only using the data for improvements in healthcare, no other purpose, only using anonymized data, and then sharing the value that's created commercially back into the healthcare system. So the NHS receives equity within Sensyne in return for making available this anonymized data for analysis. The trusts collectively now own just over 12% of Sensyne Health. In return, we invest in the improvement within the IT systems within the trusts. And we also share a proportion of the revenues that we generate back into the NHS funding patient care. We're seeing a lot of momentum in the enthusiasm, if you like, for the NHS Trust to work in partnership with the NHS, because over the last 2 years, we've really shown how this model works. Results in terms of clinical improvement, in care and results in terms of improving the process development of new medicines. This is a unique model. No one else is doing it like this. And we believe that this is going to be key to the ethical use of AI across healthcare, not just here in the United Kingdom, but also in other markets, particularly in the NHS, in the United States. If we go to the next slide, you'll see that here I have a summary of the speed at which we're developing this pipeline. So currently we have approximately 10% of UK patient data available for research. Our objective is to build that to about 20% over the next 2 years to get to about 12.5 million patients in the data set. To complement that with data sets outside of the UK of about 5 million patients, which then collectively will keep us at the forefront in having the ability to have a data set of scale, which enables us to answer questions about the rarest types of diseases, about the complexity of medical practice across all therapeutic areas. We're currently in discussions with NHS trusts, which represent a population of about 27 million people. And so we're very confident of our ability to achieve that target of 20% of the UK population over the next 2 years. The next slide just gives you a sense of the underlying value of this data. I've already said that the UK has this advantage of having longitudinal data because it is a single provider. But if we look at this graph, it just gives you some sense of the value of data compared to agreements which have been entered into in other markets, starting with agreements between Genentech and 23andMe around very detailed genomic data through down to the deal that IBM did a few years ago across very thin data, but across a very large population. The best comparator of what Sensyne is doing really is a transaction that took place about just over 2 years ago between Roche, one of the world's leading pharmaceutical companies, and a company called Flatiron, based in the United States, which had curated a data set of just over 2 million cancer patients from data generated through community cancer care in the United States. Flatiron was acquired at that point for just under $2 billion, giving you a sort of a comparator to the data set that Sensyne has available to analyze of about 6.8 million patients. If we go to the next slide, this really starts to talk a bit more detail about what it is that Sensyne does and how that delivers improvements in patient care, how that generates revenues. So as I said, we are a docking station between the healthcare providers in the UK, the NHS, hospital groups in the United States, and the pharmaceutical industry. The hospital digital records are anonymized at source, so the anonymization takes place within the NHS. We are then provided with those anonymized data sets for analysis. Those data sets never leave Sensyne. We don't share that data with anyone else. And recently we've complemented that data with an agreement with a United States company that has a large clinical trial data set, a company called Phaside, based on the East Coast of the US, which has a data set covering clinical trials of over 13 million patients across over 300,000 clinical trials across the world. This gives us a very strong combination of data to be able to answer some very difficult problems that the pharmaceutical industry faces in terms of identifying new targets for the development of new medicines, better designing clinical trials. We can go to the next slide, please. Bringing this sort of from a practical sense, really the data reflects medicine as it's practiced in the real world, which is often quite different to what takes place in a defined clinical trial during the development of a new drug. So this ability to analyze real world patient data reflected in the patient records within the hospital system enables us to get new insights which are very relevant to the development of new drugs, and in particular to better design clinical trials to enable for example, the right patients to be identified for those clinical trials who are most likely to respond well to that particular medicine through a better understanding of the differences between patients that comes from the real world data. So today we've signed agreements with 5 of the world's largest pharmaceutical companies, example being Bayer, for example, for whom we're working to do research in cardiovascular disease, one of the biggest burdens on healthcare systems around the world, looking for insights to help improve the design of clinical trials for late-stage products which Bayer has in development for the treatment of stroke and heart failure. With these agreements, they are typically a fee-for-service contract where the research that we undertake for the pharmaceutical company is paid for based upon the time and size of team that Sensyne applies to the project. So for example, with Bayer, that was a 2-year contract generating revenues of approximately £5 million. Go to the next slide, please. Now, as you can imagine, the analysis of this data and the discernment of these insights, which are of potential high value to the pharmaceutical industry, is a complex and time-consuming process. At the moment, for us to analyze the data set to identify, for example, how many patients are in the data set who have a particular condition, for example, type of cancer, takes us weeks. To do the analysis, to understand the characteristics of the patients within that data set takes months. We're investing in a platform. Part of the reason why we had the fundraising just before Christmas was to speed that process up. This is a platform which we call Sensyne, which will enable us to move from a process which is currently taking us weeks to a process which will take us seconds to understand how many patients, for example, with stage 4 lung cancer are in the data set. To take a process of analyzing that data from months down to weeks, and in doing so, enabling us to industrialize and scale, if you like, the work that we do. In other words, to be able to do more projects more quickly without having to significantly increase the size of our staff. Next slide, please. Now, this agreement that we signed with Phaseye just before Christmas, which was the other main reason for the fundraising, brings this large database of clinical trials data. So the ability to look at the world's set of clinical trials across multiple therapeutic areas and combine that understanding of that clinical trial data with the real world data that Sensyne has from the electronic patient records. This also brings a clinical trial analytics platform and a strong client base that Phaseye had established, really being an expert in providing this type of analysis from the pharmaceutical company, which we see as bringing a real critical mass and, importantly, raising our profile in the US and with the US life science industry. Next slide, please. The one important development is the growing interest in what is called synthetic clinical trials, which is where instead of using a control group in the clinical trial where the patients receive a placebo, using the data from real world data sets from previous clinical trials and from the types of data which we have available to be able to reduce the numbers of those placebo trial arms and therefore reduce the cost and improve the speed of development of these new medicines. We're starting to see these synthetic trials be used for recent approval of drugs for treatment of cancer. And there's a real ethical drive, if you like, within the industry to reduce the size of these placebo control groups. So synthetic clinical trials being an important area of application of the Sensyne AI expertise in collaboration with Phaseye, based around the agreement which we established last year. Next slide, please. The cost of clinical trials is enormous. Increasingly, people talk about how the easy drugs have been discovered. It's getting more and more expensive to discover new drugs. And we've seen how the failure rate within clinical trial development is so high that the cost to society of new medicines is becoming increasingly unaffordable. So this ability to be able to come up with the use of AI to improve clinical trial design to reduce costs and speed up is a major driver within the pharmaceutical industry. And it's one that Sensyne can be at the forefront of because of the AI expertise that we have and the size of the data set which we have available to us. Can we go to the next slide, please? Now, if we turn to healthcare, in the same way I've talked about the use of AI to analyze data to improve the development of new medicines, that same data and that same AI can be used to improve the care of patients. That's the other side of the coin, if you like, of Sensyne's docking station, using clinical AI to improve the care of patients within the healthcare system. Now, this really is based around being able in real time to be able to answer questions that can be answered through unlocking insights that are buried in those large data sets. If we go to the next slide, you'll see really a simple graphical representation of what we call the SENS clinical algorithm engine. Basically, this is a software program which generates algorithms, so computer-based calculations through the analysis of the data in the large data sets within a hospital. So an example being with the development of the pandemic, the Chelsea and Westminster Hospital in London was seeing increasing numbers of patients arriving with COVID infection in A&E. They were having to make an assessment of the likelihood of a particular individual patient needing to be admitted to the intensive care unit, needing to be put onto respirator, and trying to quickly understand the characteristics of the patients which would lead them to have a higher or lower risk of needing to be admitted to ICU or having respiration support. So we developed in collaboration with the Chelsea and Westminster an algorithm to help clinicians make that determination, a decision support algorithm, as we call it. If you go to the next slide, you'll see this graph really says one important point, which is that clinicians, informed by the ability to quickly analyze all the data in the hospital's patient database, are able to make a better determination of the risk of the particular patient that was in front of them suffering from deterioration. One of the important things in the use of AI is that it's understandable by humans. So if we are being advised by a piece of software, we need to understand how the software came to the conclusion it did. And so in the case of the AI developed here by Sensyne, it takes 40 parameters, characteristics, if you like, in the electronic patient record of the patient and compares that against the very large database. And in doing so is able to come up with a risk prediction, which then the doctor can use in making a judgment about what is the appropriate care. This risk prediction has been shown to be significantly better than other analyses that have been done. And this now is being taken forward, go through a regulatory process to then be made available more widely across the NHS and internationally. This is an example of the power of using AI to be able to unearth these insights from the data sets that exist in these electronic health records. The next slide gives an example of the application of AI in remote monitoring of patients suffering from diabetes during pregnancy. So between 16 and 20% of pregnancies are affected by diabetes, and this proportion is going up. Sensyne has developed a product which we call GDM Health, which enables the mum to be remotely monitored by the midwife or the doctor. And in doing so, improve the understanding of both the patient and of the doctor of how well that mum to be is doing in managing diabetes. It's very important to the healthy birth of the baby and the future health of the mother that diabetes is well controlled during pregnancy. And what we've seen is that the GDM Health product significantly makes a difference to the improvement of care. Really delighted that this is a product which has now been adopted in over half of NHS trusts in the United Kingdom. Over 16,000 babies have been born healthily to mothers with diabetes. And this is an example of the way in which Sensyne is able to develop a piece of software informed by the patient data, which enables us to improve care, and in doing so, generate a data set to help us better understand Why does diabetes develop during pregnancy? How can it be best treated? How can we improve outcomes for patients? The next product I want to tell you about is called Magnify. This is a product which we developed recently in response to the pandemic and uses the platform that Sensyne has developed in being able to use artificial intelligence to analyze medical images. As we know, increasingly we are scanned of various types, x-rays and so forth. We had to develop a tool to enable us to automate the analysis of medical images for the purposes of doing the research that I've just been telling you about for the last 10, 15 minutes. The Magnify technology we saw as an opportunity to apply to the problem of testing for COVID, and developed an application which we have now successfully commercialized in just a few short months, which enables us to improve the accuracy of lateral flow testing. Many of us will have had a lateral flow test. It's like a pregnancy test, which enables you to test for the presence of viral antigen to see whether or not infected with COVID. Problem with this is the variability in the reading of the test and the processing of the data from that test in an efficient manner. The Magnify product really solves that problem, enable us to improve both the reliability and accuracy of reading of the tests, but also the generation of the large data analytics to understand its the spread, if you like, of the virus through the community. If we go to the next slide, there's a video which we'll play, which quickly shows how the Magnify system works using your smartphone to be able to automatically read a lateral. You see, it automatically takes a photograph of the test. It reads that test, it sends that data to the cloud, analyzes it, and then provides a result which can be applied to any sort of lateral flow test. Obviously, the priority right now is COVID-19 antigen testing. And importantly, because it's using the capability of AI in analyzing the image from the smartphone camera, can see beyond the visible spectrum of the human eye, therefore improving the sensitivity of the test. Next slide, please. Now, we have recently licensed this technology to a healthcare company that manufactures and provides lateral flow tests for a number of applications, including for COVID. This is an example, if you like, of how Sensyne puts the AI inside other people's products. So we're providing Magnify. It's exclusively licensed to Excalibur for the lateral flow test market. That's a market which was valued about $6.5 billion before the COVID pandemic, and is growing fast as lateral flow testing is being used more broadly. But Magnify also has application beyond lateral flow tests, and so you can expect us to be applying this technology and the other tools that we have developed using AI across a range of different healthcare products in future. Next slide, please. Here's some quick summaries of the company from a financial and shareholding point of view. I think the key thing to stress here is that Sensyne is a company which generated in its last half-year results more revenues than it did in the full year previously at 2.3 million. And we're really comfortable with the projections that analysts have for the revenue growth of business. This is a business which is expected to grow revenue significantly towards financial critical mass over the next 2 years through the commercialization of the products which I've just described to you. Current market cap of just under £300 million. And important to stress that we see ourselves very much as a sort of UK champion for this type of technology, really embedded in the relationship that we have with the NHS, but which has global potential, really developing this technology and applying it outside of the UK as well. Next slide, please. So the key for Sensyne over the coming years is to build on the momentum which we've achieved in the 2.5 years since our IPO. The the business has effectively proven that the model works. The use of AI in this ethical framework in partnership with the NHS delivers very good results. And so what you can expect to see from Sensyne as we go through 2021 into 2022 is maintaining this strong momentum. That means signing additional strategic research agreements with NHS trusts, aiming to hit that 12.5 million patient target, and be signing our first agreements with international partners, so healthcare providers in other countries, particularly in the United States. Signing new pharmaceutical contracts, building on the Phase I relationship, building that roster of pharmaceutical collaborations, and launching the first version of our Sensyne platform in the middle of this year. Two regulatory milestones, which I want to highlight, really important. First, submission for regulatory approval by the UK regulator, the MHRA, of our clinical AI algorithm in gestational diabetes, providing a further value inside the AI inside our gestational diabetes software product. And our first regulatory submission in the United States to the FDA for the algorithm to help clinicians manage risk for patients suffering from COVID-19 infection. As I said, comfortable with the revenue expectations that analysts have set for the business and the ability that we have now to scale this. Next slide, please. Really, this is my last slide. Really wanted to summarize for you where I see Sensyne today, having founded the business several years ago around the idea of this unique model for working in partnership with healthcare providers to use AI in an ethical way to derive these improvements to accelerate medical research. Over the last 2.5 years, we've really proved this model works. Now it's about scaling the business. We are in front. We are a leader in this space. We need to stay in front as a UK-based healthcare technology company. That's about growing the database over the next 2 years, reaching financial critical mass, getting to profitability. We have raised the finance now to have the working capital that we need to take us through to scale of the business, which will achieve break-even point and then into profitability in the 2-year time frame. And importantly, proving that our model works, not just here in the United Kingdom, but in the United States. We've launched our first product in the US now. We've set up our commercialization team in the US. Our partnerships with Jefferson and Cognizant have really given us a good foundation for that. That's going to be the focus for us, scaling the business over the next 2 years, getting to financial critical mass. And then it's about developing the business further in global markets. We believe we've got a business here which has the potential to be a global technology leader in the ethical use of AI, built on the particular competitive advantages that we're lucky enough to have here in the United Kingdom in terms of the expertise that we have in medical and data science, and the fantastic asset that we have within the National Health Service as a single provider. I'll stop there and give you an opportunity to ask us of questions. I have with me our Chief Investment Officer, Dr. Richard Pye, and really happy to take any questions you've got for us.
Okay, well, we've had quite a few questions come in, and I would just encourage people to, I'll just start my video there. I'll just encourage people to look at the list of questions that we've got and give a thumbs up to the ones that they particularly like, and that will help my job. One question that I've got myself is, I invest in another company which is, similar in some respects, and it derives its AI through rigging up people to its own machines and getting data from them that way, and using that for making predictions about what their health outcomes are going to be. You're obviously reliant on, quite often, on getting data from third parties. And how can you ensure that the data is, of a satisfactory level, standardized in a sense, to a way that you can then utilize meaningfully?
I think that our confidence in that is based upon the fact that we're working directly in partnership with the NHS trusts that are looking after the population of the United Kingdom, and therefore the data which they have reflects the complexity of all of the different types of medical care which the NHS provides. It also includes data across the lifespan, that sort of birth to death. And so therefore the complexity of the data and the richness of the data in terms of the breadth and length of it is what really gives us the ability to be able to do the research to answer questions that you couldn't answer if you didn't have that type of data. You're absolutely right. There's lots of applications of using AI in different techniques, using it on different tools and different types of data sets. But it's the comprehensive nature of the data set, the way it covers all conditions being cared for by the NHS. I'll give you a specific example. We've seen fantastic improvement in cancer care over the last few years as we have been able to better understand cancer and develop new medicines. Drugs that go through clinical trials are tested under conditions which don't fully reflect the wide complexity of medical care in the real world. So for example, number of patients who develop cancer will also develop depression. They'll be treated for depression and treated for cancer. Those drugs will not have been tested in clinical trials in combination. To be able to answer questions on the interaction of those two types of therapy, you can look in the real world evidence of the electronic patient records to discern those insights, which then can give you new clues about how to improve care in future.
Yes, no, I can see that often it's, you don't know what you're looking for in a sense, and it's only it comes out of the data rather than comes out of a specific study. So we've got quite a few questions. So one is about the NHS Trust, and obviously you are dependent on the anonymised patient data. How do you determine the payback to the NHS Trust? Because obviously they've incentivised and they sometimes get shares in Sensyne Health.
So we established the framework right from the beginning on the basis of creating an equal community across the NHS Trust. So each trust that partners with Sensyne does so on a non-exclusive basis. It's not an exclusive relationship. In return for that relationship, making that data, once anonymized, available to us, they receive equity in Sensyne in the same proportion. So collectively with the trust we have at the moment, just over 12%. As more trusts sign up, we'll be issuing the same numbers of shares to those trusts. It's always at our IPO price, which was 175 pence. And in doing so, we sort of maintain the equity between the trusts from an equity basis. In addition, the trusts share in the royalty on revenue. So 4% of our revenues go back to the NHS, shared between the trusts in the proportion of the data that has been provided by those trusts to derive those insights.
Okay. Now, this is a difficult question to answer in some ways, but can you say something about the other organisations doing something similar, and why would a healthcare organisation use your system rather than someone else's?
So one competitor has been widely compared to us is Google DeepMind. So Google DeepMind has relationships with a number of NHS trusts where they have partnered to undertake research with those trusts on that patient data. Why would a trust partner with Sensyne? It's really, I think, a combination of, firstly, the equity relationship with Sensyne, where Sensyne provides that equity partnership back to the trust, aligns the company with the trust. It also, I think, promotes an understanding between the company and the trust of the challenges that the trust is facing. We exist to help them improve care within their trust through the better analysis of their data, but also in terms of generating a return back shared with the trust from the commercial use of that data for medical research in the pharmaceutical industry. And I think it's that really which differentiates Sensyne against its competition.
Oh, pardon me. Do you own the IP of the programs developed? I'm not sure about that question, whether that's the IP on the things that your systems and your analysis, or the outcomes of it. So
the tools that we develop, so software applications which use machine learning or artificial intelligence to undertake the analysis, we own the IP in those tools. We have developed those tools. Some of that research came from Oxford University, and we have a license agreement from Oxford University to that IP. And we have an ongoing research partnership with the departments within the university. So the IP is owned by the company in the tools, the expertise reflected in the tools. So for example, patents filed around the Magnify technology as an example, where the insight that has been generated is done for a customer, where the customer has paid for us to use that tool to generate that insight. That insight is then owned by the customer. We're paid for that work, and that's effectively how the IP is handled.
Okay. This is a question that we often get, and it's a reflection of just the way the market is these days and regulation, which you said you were comfortable with revenue expectations. It's always something that a lot of our members struggle to know what those revenue expectations are, that those figures don't often find their way out to the general investing public. So would you be able to give us a quick idea of what you believe the market consensus?
Broadly, the market consensus for the financial year. So our financial year ends in the end of April this year, and the market expectation is around 8.6 million.
Right, just quite an increase from the. I mean, yeah. When can we expect more news from the Cognizant tie-up?
So we can expect news on the Cognizant tie-up before the end of our financial year. So we launched our first product in the United States just before Christmas. So we'll be giving people an update as we go through into the spring and seeing the snowdrops start to come out. I would say over the next month, 6 weeks.
Great. Now this, I think, is a fascinating question, which is, how does the US insurance industry view what you do? I mean, I assume that they think it's pretty great, that it enables them to potentially identify problems before they become particularly expensive. But am I, and maybe nip things in the bud potentially, but am I wrong?
There's a huge, I mean, one thing that we've seen has been how the effect of the COVID pandemic has massively accelerated change within the way healthcare is provided. We've seen that here in the UK, and it's happening in the United States. So in terms of the relationship between the payers, the insurance companies, and the providers, the hospital groups within the United States, there's been a huge shift taking place, because the US healthcare economy, if I can call it that, has been massively disrupted by the effects of COVID. Some things have required much greater investment, some things less. The thing that everyone is agreed upon, and this is not a US point, this is a general point, is that we need to move to a healthcare system which is better at helping people not to get ill in the first place. So therefore identifying and preventing chronic conditions. So a great example being the product which we've just launched in the United States, which is all about managing diabetes during pregnancy, so it doesn't have a negative impact on the baby when born and doesn't have an impact on the mother. Now, that's very positive, because diabetes in pregnancy has a lifetime effect on the newborn baby and on the mother. And therefore, if you can improve the diabetes control during the pregnancy, you can have a sort of a generational effect. So providers, the providers are interested in understanding how those sort of innovations can be used, and also how they can be reimbursed by the payers for the use of those tools, which effectively reduce costs in the future. That's something which is a real debate at the moment. The thing that we're being pleasantly surprised about really is the enthusiasm for the Sensyne model in the US. It's clear that this idea of working in partnership in an equity relationship doesn't just apply to the UK healthcare system model, it also applies in the United States.
And there was a related question, which is whether we can expect more health tie-ups in North America in the near future.
Absolutely. Yeah, we have a small but well-qualified team, business development professionals in the United States. We appointed a head of US operations in the autumn last year, and we're expecting to see the first agreements. I would like to see the first agreements before at the end of our financial year. Actually, I think that that's a realistic prospect. We set a target of building a database of 5 million patients, and the United States is an important part of that aspiration.
Fantastic. We're rattling through these questions, but there's plenty more still to go. The recently announced deal with Excalibur Health for the use of Magnify with lateral flow, is that going to be an exclusive for the lateral flow technology? Is that going to be the only one that you're capable of doing for lateral flow tests?
So we have licensed the Magnify technology exclusively for lateral flow tests to Excalibur, both for use with the Excalibur tests, but also for use with other manufacturers of lateral flow tests. But we are not a diagnostics company. We're not experts. We are the clinical AI company. And so what we have done is licensed our technology, which enables Excalibur to be able to provide our technology both together with their own lateral flow tests, but also to offer it to other manufacturers of lateral flow tests.
Okay, very clear. Yeah. In the admission document, you obviously got a keen one here. There were a number of software products listed: Send, Edge, COPD, CleanSpace, etc. But there's been little no news of these since. With the exception of GDM Health, have any of these been sold in the period since IPO?
Yes. So, for example, a Send product. So that Send is a product for use within hospitals for the recording of vital signs data, so temperature, blood pressure, and so forth. And the Send product is deployed within two NHS trusts within the United Kingdom, in Oxford and in South Warwickshire.
Great. Back to the Magnify technology, and someone's asking, it seems to be similar in terms of functionality to Abingdon Healthcare's AppDX, and just asking how the two compare.
So the Magnify software uses a neural network, basically a type of artificial intelligence, which uses a deep learning algorithm to be able to analyze the image from the smartphone from two respects. One, in terms of being able to identify the line such that we can see the line beyond the human visible spectrum, and to develop a level of confidence in the reading of that line through the use of the AI. And the secondly, an algorithm which enables basically fraud detection of the use of the software. Both of those features are unique to the Magnify technology and are patented.
Okay. We often get
patent applications. They're not granted patents, but they're patent applications.
Okay. We often get a question like this, which is whether you'll need to raise capital again, and if so, how much and when, and if you do, will PIs be given an equal opportunity to subscribe in a placing?
So we have the funding necessary to meet our business plan and to fund the company with sufficient working capital to get through to profitability and generating cash. Part of our strategy, though, is to complement organic growth, which we are delivering, with sort of tactical M&A applications, which enable us to further accelerate that growth, shorten time to profitability. So if an opportunity such as that arises, which generates value for shareholders, and as a significant shareholder myself, I'm very focused on making sure that it does, we would then come back to shareholders. That would be the only reason for which we would be raising funding. And absolutely, private investors would be provided with an opportunity to participate, as we have just done with the placing that we did just before Christmas, where we had an open offer, which private investors were able to subscribe for.
Excellent. A question which is a little bit similar to a couple of ones that we've already had, but I think it is worth emphasizing again. Interesting presentation from a scientific point of view, but light on monetization and future revenue projections. So you've sort of said 8.6 million sort of target for the full year, and you're funded to reach profitability. But do you have anything you can share with us about what we might be looking at 2-3 years hence?
So so I don't provide guidance to you on a venue such as this on a future revenue expectations beyond the next financial year. I'm comfortable with quoting the number which I did, but I'm really not comfortable in going further than that. No,
what I would just say on that issue to you and to all companies, I think, is that if there's anything you can ever do to get that sort of information out into the domain of private investors, whether that's going to one of the paid for research providers like Hardman and Martin, etc., it is helpful, because post MiFID it's very difficult for us to access the same the stuff we used to be able to get off brokers.
So I think that's a very fair point, Paul. So I'm very keen to make sure that private investors do have the opportunity to be properly informed and to participate. And I get the point about the MiFID rules, very different to my experience when I was running a public company 20 years ago. If the ShareSoc members or you wanted to recommend, what would be the platform that you would rate most highly, I think Richard and I would be very interested in learning that feedback.
Okay, we'll take that away. We've only got a couple of minutes left, so we'll try to say, is it possible that in years to come, as NHS trusts receive more shares, that the NHS could collectively become the majority shareholder in Sensyne?
No. So we thought carefully about this whole idea of creating a company in this way. And, I've been a technology entrepreneur for 30 years, but I've also, for a period of 5 years, was a government minister. I've seen it from both sides, if you like. It seems to me it's really clear that where AI is using data which has been generated in the public sector, funded by taxpayers, there has to be a recognition of that through this type of construct. And increasingly, commercial models which are based around AI tend towards a winner takes most market, because the best data set generates the best algorithm, and nobody's really interested in buying the second best algorithm. So therefore, it's important that we recognize that reality by providing that fairness of ownership and partnership with the NHS. But at the same time, recognizing that the capital for building this company has come from the investment community. The company needs to provide an excellent commercial return from investors, and it needs to be run on the basis of generating that return as a business. So therefore, happy and comfortable to have the NHS growing, but as a minority shareholder and not ending up being the majority shareholder within the company. That's a principle which discussed from the beginning with the NHS, and I think people can see the sense of that.
Right. So we're almost at 6 o'clock. I think we are, but I'm going to just try and squeeze in one last question, which is obviously the AI machine learning algorithms you develop work on the data that it's been given, and the data that's been fed into it. But can it be reliably used in different areas where patient demographics or ethnicity may be different, and how can it be tailored for those sort of scenarios?
It's very important that where you're using AI like this, you test it properly. So as you would expect any other medical device to go through a process of testing that it is safe and effective, any algorithm that is used in this way has to go through that process. That's part of what we do as part of the regulatory approval process for AI. And in doing that, being really mindful of the biases that can come into algorithms if you do not ensure that you have that sufficient diversity, that representation of the population as a whole. That is something which is a very important part of expertise in data science that Sensyne ensures is used as part of the development of the products that we have within our portfolio.
And do you, I mean, it is related, when you get information from the NHS, it is anonymised, but does it include details around areas such as ethnicity, which could provide interesting insights, but which are very personal bits of data, which normally are difficult to disclose? Does the anonymising process allow that to come through?
So the process allows it to come through, yes, ethnicity, age, sex, characteristics associated with the history of the patient, but not who the patient is, not where the patient lives. So therefore, the process anonymizes the entries for an individual, but enabling the data fields to be maintained such that we can come up with a real understanding. So we've seen, for example, how COVID has a different effect on different members of our society. We only understand that because we're able to look at the data, but it's very important that the way in which that data is looked at is blinded to the personally identifiable information.
But can it be unblinded, by which I mean, if you're engaged to assist on a trial to address a particular disease, would you be able to pull a subset of people out of your data that would be particularly good subjects for that trial and go back to the NHS people and identify them backward? The NHS wouldn't be able to identify them.
Well, the NHS, so we would not.
No,
that is not what we do. We're not interested in identifying individuals. What we're interested in is identifying insights that help recognize how particular characteristics of an individual, whether that's a genetic predisposition, whether that's something that's happened because of the environment. What we're looking to see are the patterns in the data, which mean that we can identify which drugs work best on which types of patients. We're not interested in identifying individuals. Other companies do that work. So for example, recruitment of patients for specific clinical trials. That's not something that Sensyne does.
Okay, fine. Well, we've got through to, it's 3 minutes past 6, and I certainly feel that I've learned an awful lot in this hour, and I hope everyone who's tuned in has. All it leaves me to do is thank you very much for your time, Paul, and also for Richard, who wasn't needed but was sat by diligently. That was a fantastic session. I can only encourage people to leave their feedback so that we better understand, whether this tick people's boxes, what they'd like to see more of, what they'd like to see less of. The presentation will go on our website, and I think, frankly, it probably does bear repeated viewing. And finally, I'll just show you, got to remind, we've got quite a few things coming up next week. You can read that there. I am going to be presenting the Cambridge Cognition one next, I think that's next Wednesday, which is a very different company to Sensyne, but again, using science for medical developments, which is something that I think is a real strength in this country, and something that we're lucky to be able to invest in. So do sign up for any of those, provide feedback, and thank you very much for attending, and thank you, Sensyne, for presenting such an interesting hour's worth of content.